All right, you are in the right place if you're here for the Fair Rep LA teach-in on LA City Council size and independent redistricting. Again, I'm Godfrey, Deputy Director at LA Forward, and I'm here supporting the coalition's work because we're interested in making sure that Angelina's able to unlock democracy for themselves. And what we know is true is that since 1925, LA City, to be specific, has had 15 city council districts. And so we were a very different size back in 1925, almost 100 years ago, where that meant that council members were representing about 66,000 folks per person. And today, what we know is true is that each of our 15 council members oversees a district of 264,000 people or more. And we are the highest, we have the highest ratio of residents to council members in the nation. We are the least represented people when it comes to city legislation and city representation. And Fair Rep LA has been really interested in building a large coalition of folks across the city to make sure that we're aware of that, we're talking about that, and doing something about that. And so today, we are building on that exact urgency of having waited way too long to update our city charter. And we're going to update you all in what's been happening with the city charter, in particular, since last year, when we all heard on leaked audio the fact that our city council members who have final approval over drawing those 15 districts had been corruptly drawing those particular district lines. And we're here to ensure that that never happens again by pursuing independent redistricting and potentially right now reevaluating that council size that has been in place since 1925. And we're doing through this thing called charter reform. Charter reform refers to those two things being established and written in our city charter. It's kind of like our city constitution. So we have to reform it to change those things. So first, I'm going to share with you all over the first 10 minutes or so, really quickly, who's been in this conversation citywide, who at the city council level has had anything to do with charter reform, and where the conversation is right now, and where you can plug in about it. Then I'm going to pass things to our other three friends here from Fair Rep LA, who are going to walk you through some key recommendations that Fair Rep LA has been exploring to make sure if you all and others in Fair Rep are really interested in advocating for the fairest possible representation for all Angelinos, that you have that language to be able to do that. And it's in particular really important this week because on August 10th, this Thursday, is our final opportunity to give public comment before the chief legislative analyst begins to deliver her recommendations to the city council committee that's overseeing this process of reevaluating our charter. And so we want to make sure that you as the public are prepared to be able to lean in where you really glad you hear that language alongside us. As we mentioned, our population has changed over time, and so these 15 districts may not make sense right now in this newest formation of LA's history. We are not the only coalition in town that is working on these particular issues. I am also, as part of LA Forward, part of the Our LA Coalition, which is a group of 12 BIPOC serving, BIPOC driven organizations that are really wanting to make sure that BIPOC voices are centered as a part of this process of ensuring that we're ensuring that the charter, if it is to be reformed, has folks of color in mind. There's also a group of academics, as you see on the bottom, representing 6 institutions of higher education that have leaned into this process as well to produce different recommendations based on studies of other models across the nation. And so some of the conversation that we're having tonight will feature Fair Rep's recommendations, but know that our LA will also have its own set of recommendations as well as the academics. And it's our duty to make sure that the public is learning about all of these different possible recommendations, and that the council hears from you so that it knows how folks who might not be organized through these organizations are also feeling. So we're glad that you're here to learn about what Fair Rep has been thinking about all of these things. Here are the magic 7 people who are going to make an initial recommendation for the rest of City Council. Again, we have 15 City Council members, but 7 of them, almost half, are on a committee called the Ad Hoc Committee for Governance Reform. Governance reform refers to exactly this, thinking about how we should reevaluate the ways in which we're governed. that includes who draws these lines, how they are drawn, and how many people, or how many lines rather, well, yeah, how many people draw them, and also how many lines they end up drawing in terms of these council seats. And so you can see whether or not you are in one of these districts, and could be especially influential if you live in one of these city council districts. I myself, again, I'm in Koreatown. I see my council person, Council District 10 here, has been appointed to her seat. And so these are particularly important people we want to know and influence. And on August 10th, these are the folks you'll be seeing at the hearing. It's incredibly important that these folks hear from us, because they will only need one more vote from the rest of council to pass whatever the recommendation is. That will create 8 out of 15 city council members, more than half, being able to weigh in on a recommendation that ultimately could move to the ballot, where voters will need to approve whatever it is that they're recommending. Here's where we've been. If you remember the leaked audio in which we heard those corrupt city council members, along with a former labor leader, talk about how they would game line drawing for themselves. That was in October of last year, less than a year ago. And I knew exactly where I was when it happened. Less than 2 months later, this ad hoc governance reform committee formed. They asked the chief legislative analyst, which is one of the primary entities within the city, to produce reports and research and analysis for the city council so that they can make the smartest possible decisions as possible. They requested a report on these possible reforms in December. That report was then shared in March. And then starting in April, the Ad hoc Government Reform Committee started talking about different parts of the CLA's report at various hearings. And you can see even the categories of types of things they focused on. All of these hearings were open to the public. That didn't mean it was easy for the public to actually get to them. Some of these were at 10 a.m. in places that are harder to reach by public transportation. And we know that in a regular redistricting process, we might have called in, there might have been more nighttime possibilities. There were no call-in possibilities here. It was all in person or written if you were able to. And so these were really important moments for Fair Rep, RLA, the academics, et cetera, to begin to lean in. Based on the public comment that has been given so far, the council has started to move the process forward. And that's why there's like this Thursday as well. Let's share a little bit about what we've been learning from our council members by sitting in these particular hearings. Of the 7 of them, they have a wide variety of knowledge about this. Lots of us only know what's been true for our status quo over the last 100 years, since 1925. But what we know is true is that our state has pursued independent redistricting. We know that other cities have pursued it, and elsewhere in the nation, different city districts have increased the number of seats that they've had. They've created at-large seats that cover the whole city. They've even added multiple members per district. Lots of different thinking has been happening nationally, but our council members have been on a wide scale of knowledge about these. And so it's been up to us to educate ourselves as the public. And we're passing some of that knowledge on to y'all tonight so that you can advocate with language that represents your particular perspective as well. On independent redistricting, we think that they're probably going to do it, which means that what we can expect in 2024 probably is some sort of redistricting measure on the ballot. We don't really know yet whether it'll be on the primary, which is in the February-March range, or the general, the presidential, right, a final election next year, which is in the October-November range. We believe that the council is generally favorable, but we do think there's lots of variations in the weeds of what it means to be independent, how many people are part of this process, who's managing it, all of that. And so in this call, you're going to hear about some of those variations that we think are important to talk about. For council size, what we are seeing is, even though there are many Angelenos who are in favor of expansion of the number of districts that we have, we are hearing from our council members a little bit more hesitation, a little bit more conservative opinion on if we expand, how large we should expand. And that comes from a number of different places. It changes the way they can wield their power in Los Angeles City Council. And so certainly there's a little bit of a hesitation about changing the way they've learned the game. The other things that we know are true is that one of the arguments that they've put forth is that just because you expand the number of city council districts that there are doesn't mean that services expand alongside that. And so they're trying to figure out, if people are expecting that, how do we make that happen while also figuring out whether or not we should expand to begin with. And we know that they've not actually considered these other models that have happened in other places in the United States at large seats, which means that someone doesn't just cover a particular district of the city, but they cover the entire city as a city council person, which would begin to change the I scratch your back, you scratch mine type of mentality of the current single member district format that we have. It begins to put a completely different power dynamic in there as well. They haven't really looked at large. They haven't looked at what Portland has done, which is to have multiple city council members per district so that you have multiple representatives as a resident as well. So we think there's lots of work to do there. And so what we know is true is that we've needed to really up the ante on community engagement, which is part of tonight's teach-in, because of the mixed and limited community engagement thus far by the initial hearings, and all of the different coalitions that you saw on an earlier slide are really moving the ball forward and trying to articulate particular stances. Here's where you can expect to hear, going backwards, sorry. Here's where you can expect to hear these particular stances. Again, this Thursday at City Hall at 1 p.m. is their next meeting. You will hear 3 presentations from 3 different groups. This group, Fair Rep LA, will not be one of those groups. So this group is trying to make sure that it turns out public comment from folks like yourselves. So you'll be able to hear the presentations and then participate in public comment should you want to. And today you're going to hear what talking points you can possibly use and adapt to be able to bring yourself to public comment. Again, there's no phone in, there's no Zoom in. This has to be in person, will be the largest effect. Or you can also submit written comment or email or something, but in person is where the effect's going to happen. On August 21st, we're supposed to then hear the chief legislative analyst's presentation of their recommendations, and they are listening to us, which is why it's important to make sure we show up to public comment. Currently, the committee is aiming for September to have an initial recommendation for the rest of council. Multiple coalitions are trying to push that date back. They don't. Many coalitions are thinking we need more time for community engagement and to really center voices that haven't been centered in this process. We're going to see whether or not the committee does move on those demands. But right now, September 18th has been pitched as a day in which the committee will have a proposal. And then you'll see that leaves us with a number of choices from November through November. If the council wants to put something on the March primary ballot, and of course we have, we got our ballot starting in February, but if they wanted something on that ballot, they would need to approve everything and vote it through by November. That's just a couple of months from now. So we don't know how fast they're going to move if they decide that they want to put on their ballot in February and March. They could also take their time and talk about these things and then finalize things before June of next year, which is theoretically as much of a runway as they could use in order to put something on the November ballot of next year, which of course we receive ballots in October for this October-November election. So we don't know yet what they're going to do, but that's what's coming up over in the next year and a half. And it all has already begun. And you're playing a vital role in making sure that they hear from the public over the next 6 weeks or so as a part of this process. With that, I'm going to pass things on to Rob to talk about how Fair Rep has leaned into all of this.
Thank you, Godfrey. And, just to draw a little connection between where Godfrey left off, we actually have not had a single vote in this entire time from this government reform committee on expansion and redistricting. They've merely been discussing a buffet of options that were presented to them by the chief legislative analyst. So there is not a recommendation that is moved forward or is moving forward. That is being decided right now. And that's why we wanted to come together and provide a list of issues that from hearing the committee's discussion, we felt like they were important. And generally speaking, the idea is to point the committee in the direction of good, positive changes and reforms and steer them clear of potentially picking up anything bad. Fair Rep LA formed out of a redistricting coalition that was engaged during the 2020-2021 process. And we all kind of went into there with the perspective that let's try to make this better than it is right now. Let's make the best that we can out of this really unfortunate system. We put together a list of recommendations, and ultimately council picked up one of them, and that was to require that the conversations the council members and their staff have with commissioners off the record have to be reported. We wanted them to be completely banned. And as we all saw in the Fed tapes, those off the record conversations with the commissioners came front and center in everybody's scrutiny. We all through that process realized that this was not only a fatally flawed process, but this was just worse than having the politicians draw the lines themselves. Because at least if they were drawing the lines themselves, we could be able to identify who's pulling what strings. But instead, we were having to decipher what kind of ways they were wielding their commissioner as a gladiator to execute their personal will. So we wanted to get out of that. The biggest thing that process illuminated was that 15 districts weren't enough. So we started to be engaged in this issue during that redistricting cycle and pushing the commissioners and council to consider council expansion. The Fed tapes were a huge shot in the arm for this effort. On the screen in front of you, you can see the formal organizations that are a part of Fair Rep LA, but we try to make sure this is a big tent, and there are organizations who aren't formally a part of Fair Rep LA, but participate in the coalition or have organizers that participate in the coalition. We have neighborhood council members that are participating in their individual capacity, and we have just regular old LA voters, activists who care about their city. And those folks are extremely important because, as you might find at City Hall engaging in coalition work, a lot of times the most important people are those that are giving up their free time and not getting paid $1 to do it. So as a result, we have a different approach to, decision making. There is not a steering committee or a rigid voting process where organizations, have to vote. This is an individual based preference. So out of the 100 or so participants in the Fair Rep LA Coalition engaged in the ongoing organizing, all of them have a voice in what recommendations we've put in front of you. We required all of them to have at least 2/3 supermajority support. There are 2 issues on here that are on the fence right now, but almost all of the other ones are very, very strong consensus issues. So if we could go to the next slide. We've got close to 30 potential recommendations, and these cover an array of topics, everything from the council's size to implementation and what other kind of considerations they might need to make. They include the formation process of the Independent Redistricting Commission. Even though independent redistricting is infinitely better than regular old school redistricting with politicians drawing their lines, it takes a whole lot more time. You have to get that commission together in an independent way, and that takes outreach, that takes a whole lot of input. So it's important to make sure that we get the right commissioners on this body. We also get into the commission rules, the city structure as a whole, and some of those structural concerns that need to be looked at. And lastly, we also look at ethics reforms. We are going to be putting out a lengthy document that overviews a little bit of background on all of these issues. As of now, all we have are the headlines, the specific recommendations, and you can see those at the bottom of our talking points for August 10th. If you go to bit.ly/fairrepla, and it is case sensitive, unfortunately, but if you go to that link, Godfrey's dropped it in the chat, you will be able to see that laundry list of 30 recommendations. And there was a question in the chat about who will be speaking on our behalf on the committee on Thursday. We hope you all will be. Unfortunately, the council president's office has decided that we don't need more voices in this process. We need fewer. And they have decided to exclude Fair Rep LA. We are going to do everything we can to make sure that they hear us regardless. And I promise you that there are a number of council members on that committee that aren't all that happy about this and will be very much hearing out the recommendations that we have and the public comment that you hear. So this is just one of those things. This is the beast of city council. And we just got to do everything we can to scrap and fight through it, because a lot of times I think they just want to get people disillusioned with things and to tap out. And that's the last thing we should do right now. So if we can go to the next slide. The first thing is ethics reform. This is something that, you know, we really strongly believe in this for a few reasons. And some of these are directly related to redistricting. I mentioned the commission formation process. We have to have somebody in charge of putting together applications, of setting deadlines, receiving those applications, evaluating them, and, you know, doing that whole process at the front end. And we wouldn't want to have that with somebody that's an elected official. So that rules out a few different offices. We wouldn't want to have somebody that is directly appointed and responsive to an elected official. So our solution is that we should have the ethics commission overseeing the commission's formation process. And that is why ethics reform is extremely important, because we can strengthen the independence of the ethics commission by making sure that we don't have people on the commission who are appointed by elected officials as they are right now. All 5 of them are appointed by elected officials. And, you know, sometimes our elected officials make really good appointments to the ethics commission. Our previous city controller did an exceptional job of that. And our new controller recently appointed somebody that you might know, Jamie York from the Reseda Neighborhood Council, who many of us are really excited about. We don't get them like that. A lot of times these are people who are either kind of aloof about the issues or have their own biases or aren't really looking out for, you know, the public as a whole. So it's really important that we have a different kind of ethics commission handling this process. The other important thing is all of these other reforms we're talking about, redistricting, council expansion, they take time to be implemented. We already have an ethics commission. So if we put this on the ballot in March, that is something that could be implemented right after certification. They could have an increased budget. We could increase the size of the commission. We could have new restrictions. We could give them new power. All of that right away. That is not the case with some of our other reforms. And I think that the people as a whole really do want to see change and see it change quickly. And one of the problems we saw with Measure H and HHH, which dealt with homelessness, is it was too little too late. It was something significant, but when voters are having to wait 3 to 4 years to see a shelter pop up, they're not going to feel like there was actual change delivered. The other thing is, just realistically speaking, our biggest challenge is that we're trying to tell people something counterintuitive. You can reform your government for the better by having more politicians. And there is an inherent resistance to trusting that. We have to be able to explain to people why that's better. And ultimately, no matter what we say, they're not going to want to just offer a blank check. They're going to want to see some assurances that there's going to be greater accountability at City Hall. So this is one of those things where our ethics commission needs to have a protected minimal budget. They need to be adequately resourced. They need to have proper outside counsel. They need to have the ability to put things directly on the ballot. These are all really big things that we could do to change City Hall. And this is just something that can't be left out of the conversation. Nikolai or Valerie, if you've got anything to add on ethics charter reform, or anybody has any questions in the chat, please speak up now. Otherwise, I think we can move on to the next issue.
Just one thing, that adding ethics first will make people trust the independent redistricting commission, because we need to make sure that it actually is independent. And so if we're going to have the ethics folks take care of that, then they need to beef up their powers.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I think we're ready for the next slide, Godfrey. Our recommendation here is that a change in council size must be implemented in time for the 2026 elections. And the question of council size should be placed on the November ballot in a manner which in which a sufficiently thorough redistricting process can occur in advance of the 2026 elections. What does that all mean? First, we want to see this thing ideally on the November 2024 ballot. There's going to be a really good turnout happening in March. There's a presidential election, but we would rather see more Angelenos participating in this decision. One of the reasons it did poorly in 1999 is because it was about 300,000 people that actually weighed in on the charter question. So we would like to see it in a bigger, more diverse turnout electorate. More than anything, we would like to see the council and the public have the ability to give the proper input to get the details right. As if you pay attention to reform, what really matters is getting the details right. So giving us the time to hear from the public, not having the council in a rushed situation, making sure we get every little thing proper. Honing in on that question of council size is really complicated. And the report we got from the chief legislative analyst earlier this year was really inadequate in looking deeply at that issue. So we want to see more time for the policy making process. We want to see more time for campaigners to be able to build up the resources and capacity to handle a campaign, because there are going to be people attacking this. We need to make the case to voters directly. And beyond that, we want to make sure that there is just a whole lot more time for voters to take this in. This is something where there's going to be a lot of skepticism about what council sends to voters because of the cloud of darkness that lasts over them. So we really do believe that this is something that we can't, wade through in a really rushed, haphazard way. So working back from that, we're working from the assumption we might be doing this thing in November. And the question is when should this be implemented? There have been some on the council that seem to be okay with this idea that this wouldn't be implemented until 2032. And that would mean that we wouldn't see a new election under new lines. We wouldn't see fair representation until 2032, 10 years after the release of the LA Fed tapes. And this is just something I talked earlier about too little, too late. Like, this would be a really disappointing thing to do, is to say to voters, hey, look, we put something on the ballot for reform is coming. You're going to see it any day now, and just wait like 8 more years. That is not a situation that I think is tenable. We have an unmanageable government right now. We have rigged maps right now. Maps that were designed to disenfranchise tenants, maps that were designed to punish progressives, maps that were designed to punish individual council members, maps that were designed to deprive communities. And that was not just done in a vacuum, it was done with racist, discriminatory intent. So this is just a situation where we've got to see change sooner rather than later. And unfortunately, if we wait until 2028 or 2030 to do it, folks are going to be saying, we're already almost to 2032. Do we really want to redistrict again? Let's save some money, save us some headaches, and we'll just wait. It is entirely possible to put this thing on the ballot in 2026. One issue, though, is that if we wait till November to vote on it, that leaves us with a very tight runway. So our recommendations include some some ways in which we can buy ourselves more time. As I mentioned earlier, the commission's formation process takes a lot of time. So we want to have enough time for people to submit their applications. That requires organizations doing outreach. There's a whole runway in advance of our commissioners being seated that needs to be handled. So 2026 implementation could be handled by one. We could put the redistricting proposal on the ballot in March, and that would allow the commission to take the early steps to get off the ground. So we would at least be able to get an early head start on putting together the applications, doing the outreach, beginning to take them in. Another thing we could consider doing is moving towards ranked choice voting and eliminating our primaries. And that would buy us an extra 5 months. So that is another interesting option, is to just get rid of our primaries. I want to pause there and see if I've left anything out. Godfrey, Nikolai, Valerie. And if there are any questions in the chat, please feel free to drop them. I don't believe I missed anything, but please flag if I did. So I believe we can go on to the next slide. And I am not the person who put together these lovely charts. So I will defer to that man for the next couple slides. And Nikolai, can you explain your lovely chart here?
For sure. Thank you, Rob. So as you kind of saw in that first slide, the population of the city of Los Angeles has grown really drastically in the last century. And now our representation is one council member to 265,000 Angelinos, which, as you can see on this chart here, of the 20 largest cities in the United States, is way higher than any other city. So obviously we need to expand our city council, and the Fair Rep LA recommendation that we've come up with is to expand to a minimum of 23 council members. Godfrey, if you can take us to the next slide, please. So this kind of helps you see what exactly that council size representation might look like at various council sizes. So as you can see, at our recommended minimum of 23, we would be roughly the equivalent of representativeness of the city of New York, and we essentially tying us for second place in least representative city in the United States. And we would be behind Phoenix at that point. There's a couple of additional math numbers that I've provided, so you can see how the number of residents per elected council representatives would be reduced as we increased in size up to a council size of 41.
And just if you're like me and the first time you saw this chart, your head was whirling, you can follow that gold bar for the city of LA and see the potential district number on the lower end, and see as that goes up, the number of people per representative is where that mark is. So just wanted to make sure that that's clear for everybody, because I remember the first time I saw that, it took me a solid minute to figure it out.
Thank you, Rob.
Godfrey, I think we can go to the next slide. Thank you. And there are a number of benefits of having smaller council districts. The biggest one is it would be less expensive to run and win a campaign. And you might say, oh, well, money's always going to rule this thing. And like, I follow money in politics, and you're not wrong that money plays an absolutely dominant role in our elections. But I would point you to a candidate in Council District 15 who made it to a runoff last cycle, and they had raised about $50,000. They didn't even get any public matching funds, and they made it to the runoff. We've seen candidates raising anywhere in the range. I mean, the Council District 11 candidate who finished topped in the primary was around 70,000. We've seen a number of candidates get heavily outspent by their opponents, both directly and indirectly through outside money, and yet they are still able to win. And I believe that you don't necessarily need to have more money or even close to as much money. You just got to have enough. And that is somewhere in the range of $100,000 to $300,000. By having, smaller districts, that is fewer voters to talk to. That means it's a whole lot more easily for you to, realistically speaking, knock on every door in that district. And it's really, really important that we have competitive elections for a couple reasons. And I think this is one thing that many people look at council expansion, they're like, what does this have to do with corruption? And it doesn't directly. There are some ways in which it indirectly does. And I think a really big one is that we have, up until now, had really uncompetitive elections. We went 15 years where we didn't have a single incumbent council member get faced with a runoff, let alone lose an election. We've since then, with moving our elections to higher turnout elections and expanding our matching funds program and seeing a whole lot more grassroots energy, seeing 3 incumbent council members go down in the last 2 cycles. So there's been a big change there. And I think you might notice that when your elected official is on the campaign trail or in a big race, a really tightly fought over one, all of a sudden sidewalks are getting fixed, trees are getting trimmed, they're out in the community, they're having a town hall, they're having a forum, like they become a very different person when they're in a very tough race. The other issue is that with redistricting at a basic level, before I go on, I want to make sure I didn't miss my second point on having more competitive elections. Our best check on corruption isn't the feds, the DA, or anybody else stepping in, or the ethics commission. It is being able to vote out a bad or unresponsive elected official. And I say that because our bribery laws have been heavily weakened by the Supreme Court. Unless you have elected officials texting each other corrupt deals about bribes for votes with emojis, it's really hard to be able to prove this thing in court. So that's why we really have to have a system where voters are able to get rid of corrupted elected officials. Redistricting in the city of LA is extremely difficult. We've just got 15 puzzle pieces to work with for 4 million people. We don't have a nice, clean boundary. We've got San Fernando cut out. We got Santa Monica cut out. We got Culver City, Beverly Hills, West Hollywood. And then we got this little shoestring that connects the rest of the city to San Pedro and Wilmington. That all makes it really difficult to draw good lines. And this is something in particular that leaves communities like Watts in a really difficult situation, because based on the numbers, based on the geography, they are pretty much stuck in District 15 where they are neglected. And this is a situation that the commission grappled with in 2021, is they wanted to move Watts into District 9. There was a really compelling campaign about doing that, but they realized we're gonna just have to put somebody else in their same unfortunate spot in District 15. The only way we can grapple with that is by increasing the number of seats. The other issue is, making it easier for council members to realistically engage with their communities, manage the problems, turning out to neighborhood council meetings, actually being able to realistically manage a district of 250,000 people is just extremely difficult. That literally every single council district is bigger than the city of Long Beach. Like that's a pretty wild thing to think about. They got like 9 council members for their city. We want to make sure that beyond just the actual representation matters and being able to elect a more diverse council that represents our communities, there's also the internal politics of our city. Our mayor is kind of neutered in that, like, council votes 15 to 0 pretty much every time. So the mayor, their veto is irrelevant if council knows they can easily override it. And that's kind of led to this situation where naturally you would assume there's checks and balances. These people are going to hold each other accountable. That doesn't occur in City Hall. The mayor stays in their lane, the council stays in their lane, and they put on a very nice face for the public. The other dynamic is that the council president wields an extremely dangerous, lethal, and at times overbearing control over their colleagues. And that's something that increasing the number of council members will, one, make for a more fluid council, and that it would be easier to see some change in who's represented there. And as a result, it would be harder for the council president to keep a lock on their votes to keep on getting reelected. It would also make it more difficult for a council president to punish them, because they would be able to find more allies on the council to use procedural maneuvers that aren't used now because everybody's scared of the council president. That dynamic could potentially change. I want to pause there and see if there's anything that Valerie, Nick, Godfrey, you'd like to add on this? I think we're good for the next slide then. Nikolai, since you took the painstaking efforts to put together some of these maps, I don't know if you want to give a quick commentary on this.
For sure. So as Rob was saying, you can kind of see over on the left the CD15 area with the conjoining lots. And you can just see like the massive swaths of the city that each of these 15 districts covers. By expanding city council, we can create more compact districts that really are unified around specific communities that really give that community a voice, rather than bunching together a bunch of different communities and having them fight for a voice. So these maps are created using Dave's redistricting. We have tutorials for that on the FairUp LA website, and we also recently hosted a 1-hour introduction to Dave's redistricting. So feel free to go check that out and make your own maps. On these maps, you can see that I've drawn at least maps for 23 and 31 districts. You can see that Watts at 23 is able to create a more unified district with parts of Harbor City and parts of South LA. The rest of South LA is able to create its own compact district, and then Koreatown is also usually encompassed in a more compact district, rather than being part of CD10 and joining the communities of South LA. And then you can see that at 31 councils, at a council size of 31, San Pedro and Wilmington become their own very compact district. The Harbor Gateway kind of becomes its own district. And then we have a bunch of unique community districts within the city itself. So yeah, I found it very helpful to use Dave's redistricting to kind of create these visualizations. So if this is something that you're interested in doing, I really highly recommend checking it out. Thank you.
I think we can go to the next slide, Godfrey. Nikolai.
Thank you. Thank you, John, for asking earlier about ranked choice voting. Definitely something that needs to be considered. And currently the City Council and the CLA have not at all mentioned ranked choice voting in their considerations of the charter reform. So specifically, ranked choice voting means that each voter would select multiple candidates instead of just a single one. And they would list the candidates in the order of their preference. So once votes are tallied, the candidate with the fewest votes would be eliminated, and anyone who voted for them, their next choice would be counted instead. This incentivizes coalition building in ranked choice voting. More women, more people of color, and more third-party candidates are incentivized to run and win in their elections. And as Rob mentioned earlier, by creating ranked choice voting, we can eliminate primaries, which is why ranked choice voting is also sometimes called instant runoff voting. And that really helps us implement both expansion and independent redistricting in time to have new lines by 2026, which is a really big benefit in my mind. If you'd like to learn more about ranked choice voting in general, you can check out one of our coalition members, CalRCV, and their whole website is dedicated to the benefits and the ways that ranked choice voting could work. And we can move on to the next slide.
I would just add to that, I don't know, I might have missed, I was reading the chat, just the we would be able to save money, not just on the administration of elections and what we pay the county to cover the administration of the primaries, but that means that we could also save money that is going to the matching funds program for the primaries. So hypothetically speaking, this could be a way to pay for some of the costs with council expansion while also increasing the amount of money that's available for a matching funds program. The other thing that's really important is because we have these like longer gaps now, we used to have a situation where somebody would get elected and they'd be sworn in within a short amount of time, within a couple of months. Now, for certain elections, give the example of Kevin De Leon, he got elected to his seat in March, but that term for Jose Huizar wasn't up till November. So that left a huge gap in leadership of 8 months, which was problematic for voters being able to get a new representative, but also extremely problematic because Jose Huizar or Kevin De Leon was looking to find a way to find some money along the way and was picking up a bunch of consulting work, which got him some bad LA Times headlines. Sorry to blabber on. We can roll on to the next one.
So another thing that's not really being considered by the current city council, the ad hoc governance committee, and the CLA is that we're really talking about specifically single member districts and expanding our city council to include more single member districts. We're not really changing the way that that representative model would work. So there's a couple of alternatives. For example, we could have hybrid at-large districts, which means that in addition to having these single-member districts, we could have a small number of at-large representatives who would represent the city as a whole rather than a small district. And then we would all vote for them as a city as a whole rather than them running in a specific district. So as Rob mentioned earlier, that can change the mentality within city council and really incentivize representing citywide solutions rather than, as Godfrey said at the very beginning, I scratch your back, you scratch mine mentalities that really don't prioritize the voters of the city. Another alternative council design that we could consider is multi-member districts. So again, we would have distinct districts within the city, but rather than electing a single representative to each one of those districts, we could elect multiple representatives. Portland recently passed this for their city council model. And by combining a multi-district or a multi-member district with ranked choice voting, you can really incentivize coalition building within that district and have that community elect multiple members that are truly representative of like a multitude of opinions within that district rather than just the winner take all, whoever got, the plurality of votes. And I'll let Rob and Valerie kind of build on that. All right, great. So yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that City Council is currently considering only single member districts and that our recommendation is that the other models need to be considered and given a public voice for us to have a discussion about those alternative models. Go ahead and take us to the next slide, please, Godfrey. This is a chart I created of some of the various models throughout the United States. You can see the total number of representatives for that city. You can see the year that they updated their city charter or their representative model. As you can see, Los Angeles is very far behind back in 1925, and many cities have updated their models significantly more recently. But you can also see that out of these cities, some have that single district model as Los Angeles does currently, but there are multiple cities that utilize a hybrid model. Houston, Columbus, Seattle, Charlotte, and Jacksonville all have a hybrid model with, and interestingly enough, all of those models also differ within themselves. Columbus uses a from district model where they use districts in their primary election, but then vote at large in the general election so that everybody in the city has a voice over district representatives. Where Jacksonville has an at-large model where their 5 at-large council members actually have to reside in super districts because they found they didn't want all 5 of those at-large council members coming from the most wealthy, influential parts of the city. So even within hybrid models, there's a lot of specificity. And the thing that really got to me as I was researching all of these different cities is the plurality of ideas that there is in terms of what makes an equitable representational model. Cities continue to revamp what their models are in order to bring that equitable representation to their citizens. So just letting everybody know that there's definitely a lot for us to look at, and we shouldn't be limiting ourselves to just the single member models. But go ahead and take us to the next slide, please, Godfrey.
Okay, so I was listening to The Honest Truth About Dishonesty by Daniel Ariely, and it just fit in right perfectly here. You probably know him. He's famous for Predictably Irrational. But in this book, he's kind of talking about how we all lie or cheat, sometimes to ourselves, a lot of times to others, and he calls it the fudge factor. So that's the bad news, but the good news is that you can use environmental cues and context to help keep us all honest. So things like ex parte communications ban, where the politicians have no communications with the commissioners, is really important so that we don't get that political influence happening when they're drawing the lines. And I think we all know why this is so important because of those leaked tapes. Anything else you want to add here? Rob, Nick, Godfrey.
Just how important it is that this kind of ban applies to everybody out there, just because it's very easy to say that, like, oh, well, we'll focus on the elected officials and their staff, but they all have campaign staff or friends or campaign supporters. So we don't want elected officials to be able to use a third party to be able to communicate on their behalf. So what we're recommending is a complete ban on any kind of ex parte communications with commissioners or their staff from anybody in the public on redistricting.
Yes, because just telling folks that you had those communications is not enough. It just needs to be a total ban. So the next slide. Our next recommendation is that Independent Redistricting Commission needs to get robust compensation. This is hard work, and we are not about unpaid labor here. So the commissioners will be having to listen to public comment about communities of interest. They have to learn all the ins and outs and the rules that apply to redistricting. They have to bring their own understanding of Los Angeles with them, and they have to get along with other commissioners. They got to analyze the data, and they got to draw the line. So this is like a lot of work, and so they need to be paid accordingly. All right, next slide. Exactly. As Lauren says, unpaid labor is, it privileges the well-to-do. And that's kind of what we saw at the state level. The first round of folks they picked were all lawyers. So we need everyday folks that are involved in redistricting and drawing the lines. All right, so how to get involved. First thing, give public comment on Thursday, August 10th, 1 p.m. at City Hall. We have our link to the talking points here. The second thing you can do, like how Nick did and how he had all of those beautiful maps, you can draw your own map. We have a tutorial that goes with that. We have a Google Doc. You can use Dave's Redistricting, and we have all of the links to that on our website. And third, if you are part of the neighborhood council system, you can submit a community impact statement. And Jamie and Rob were fantastic in putting together some examples and drafts that you can use to kind of hop off and use that as your base. So all of this is obviously available on our website. So if we can go to the next slide. Here we go. Here's the QR code, the ways to find us on social media. Ooh, that's the new Twitter logo.
I was just going to say, I
What is
apologize.
that? I was like, what is that?
not going to put anybody on the spot, but that shall forever remain the actual Twitter logo. Not legible.
So there's the QR code. Go to our website. We hope to see you on August 10th. Just drop in the chat if you think you'll be able to make it, just so we can see. And I think this is the last slide. So if there's any questions, you can also go ahead and drop that in the chat. I know we're a little bit over time, but awesome. Thank you, Ross. Yay, Carolina.
So the talking points that you saw in there will get updated a little bit over the next few days, and we will have that full letter that kind of overviews all of these issues in a bit more detail. Tips for those who haven't submitted public comment in person before: you will have just 1 minute. So please, like, keep that in mind. And I always like to think of it from the perspective of, I want to make a good point. 2, maybe 3 at most. You really can't do more than 3 points in a public comment that's a 1 minute long. So I would recommend looking to our talking points, and there might be some main asks that we're asking everybody to put out there. If you like the recommendations we put together, you can say, I support the Fair Rep LA recommendations. But I would think about it from the perspective of how has redistricting affected you, or how has council expansion affected you, or the lack of council expansion? Representatives not following up, not doing constituent work, or whatever it is. Think about what kind of personal perspective that you can bring to the table, because these talking points, like, it's not about everybody repeating talking points. It's about you bringing your personal perspective, and that's always a whole lot more engaging for our elected officials. Don't feel nervous. Our council members mess up all the time. Kevin De Leon became famous for messing up the Pledge of Allegiance. Like, this stuff happens, and I promise you that if you have an embarrassing moment up there, or you flub up a word, like, that happens to me all the time. You just fix it and move on. Honestly, most of the time, people won't even catch when you mess things up. And if you take a little bit of a pause to gather yourself, don't get too nervous, because I promise you that 1 second pause feels to you like an eternity, but it's actually, to most people, just goddamn normal. And it might even just sound like a dramatic pause. So don't overthink this thing. Go up there, give your public comment. If you don't have more than 30 seconds, cool. But, like, you being there and saying you care about this thing really matters. So even if you come up there and say 1 sentence, that is fantastic. And I promise you that if you've never done anything like that before, the next time you go up there and give your public comment, you will feel a whole lot more confident. That's just the nature of this thing. The nerves never really go away. You just learn that, like, I got nothing to worry about. This is just public comment. So I would encourage you to enjoy it. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us via email at fairrepla@gmail.com. Any last questions? We are at 7:05, so we want to hold it open if there are any last questions on this thing.
How do people submit written comment, Rob?
If you go to the talking points document, there are a number of links in there, and one of those links is a direct link for submitting written public comment. It's really easy to do. You no longer have to email anything to the clerk. There's a form that you can it'll be auto-filled for the council file. So you just drop your comment in there, and if you have a PDF or something that you've prepared separately, you can attach that. It's extremely easy to do.
Okay, I'm just going to read these out. Will there be feedback to participants on the council meeting?
Yes, we will try to do our best to give you a solid takeaway after that meeting. The expectation is that at some point before the meeting that follows that, we'll get updated recommendations. So we'll try to make sure that we keep you in the loop as things move through. We try to respect your inbox and not send more than, an email a week. But, that'll change a little bit as things pick up and as needed.
Will the committee's meetings take place in the council chambers?
Yes. Who knows? It's City Hall, so maybe at a future meeting, they'll decide to put it in a small room. So to limit how many people can show up. But this meeting that is coming up is in the LA City Council chambers on the 3rd floor.
So
And
are there
talking
any
points
more?
give you a heads up on nearby metro stations, as well as instructions for if you would like to call your council member to get free parking, or recommendations on lots nearby that are a bit more affordable if you'd like to go that route.
Okay, are there any more ad hoc governance reform committee meetings after Thursday?
Yes, we got a whole lot coming up. So this thing will be going on. They say they're going to be looking at other issues, but at a minimum, this committee will have a lot of activity over the next couple months on this particular issue. There was also a question on San Pedro City Hall. Unfortunately, they have no plans to have any additional meetings outside of City Hall. That could possibly change. We encouraged them to have a meeting in Watts earlier this year, because we figured that we should get to an area that was most directly impacted last cycle, and one that would be a whole lot shorter of a drive for anybody in San Pedro. But unfortunately, the council president declined to do so. And if you have any last aching question, this is your final opportunity. Well, with that, I think I want to thank everybody for turning out, and thank Godfrey in particular for doing a lot to help facilitate this event and managing the show from that end. So I will hand it back to you, Godfrey.
Sure. Thanks so much, Rob. Thanks to everybody for being here tonight. We know some of you need to get to dinner and or other evening responsibilities. So thanks again. We'll follow up with these various links, or you can start getting them in your browser on your own. But thanks so much. And we'll figure out a way to distribute this recording as well. So I'm going to stop recording.